So, Mark, how soon is soon? When do we cross the line?
Well, Kailey, how about today? That would be nice. In the next few days, a couple, 3 weeks. If it goes on much longer than that, I suspect that we'll see much higher oil prices than are current today. We're drawing down inventory, and the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is starting to fade. And if we don't get a resolution, if the Strait doesn't open, if we don't get more production soon, then I think prices are going to start to jump again, and we'll get to that $5 a gallon that Mr. Atwater was talking about, and that would be, I think, enough to push the already tenuous economy into a recession. So it's got to happen here very quickly in the next day, 2 days, 3 days, next week or so. Beyond that, I think we got a real problem.
So we're on the threshold of a recession. It sounds like, Mark, we're at about $4.50 just south of that per gallon right now. Do we need to hit that $5 mark for the ingredients to be in place?
Yeah, well, I think that's about right. I mean, we've done some simulations of, what would it take? What kind of oil price over what period of time would it take to push the economy into recession? And it's about $125 a barrel. Right now we're closer to today we're down. We're closer to 90, $95 a barrel. But if we're at 125 and we stay there for 2-3 months, that would be pretty consistent. I think if I did the arithmetic correct, about $5 a gallon, maybe a little bit over. And that would, at that point, be enough to push the fragile economy into recession. And Joe, the thing that I worry about the most is the consumer, lower middle income households. They are under a lot of pressure, and you can see that very clearly in the data we got this week. If you look at real disposable income, so that's after inflation, after tax income, it's actually falling now on a year-over-year basis. So, and that's the fodder for spending. So if we get even higher prices, gas over $5, and that those real incomes continue to decline, I think consumers at that point are going to pack it in, and that would be enough to push us into recession. So we're at 90, 95, 125 would do it. So we're not there, but we're uncomfortably close.
Well, and if we ultimately do get there, Mark, what then? Would you expect that there would be a policy response, either a fiscal policy response or a monetary one? Because what's the Fed to do if this is, once again, a supply-driven inflation problem that could weigh on growth?
Yeah, good point, Kailey. I don't think anyone comes to the rescue here. It's hard to see fiscal policymakers getting it together quickly enough to help out, at least in the amount of time that is necessary to do that. I don't think the Federal Reserve will be in a position to come to the rescue either. I mean, if it's because of higher oil prices and inflation, that probably means that inflation expectations are also continuing to rise. And I think the Fed would be much more focused on getting that inflation expectations back down than they would on the economy. They would ultimately feel like, it's necessary to get that inflation, even if it resulted in a recession, because if they don't, then inflation will become more persistent, more entrenched, require even higher interest rates down the road, and result in an even deeper, more prolonged recession than would otherwise be the case. So take our lumps up front. So I just don't see Congress, the administration, or the Federal Reserve coming to the rescue here if in fact, that scenario of 125 comes to pass.
So it's interesting that you don't necessarily expect that of even a Kevin Warsh-led Federal Reserve. We were just hearing from the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, who first sounded more optimistic about the consumer than you do, Mark, but also was talking about it being a new era at the Fed. Just listen quickly to him in the White House briefing room yesterday.
I believe that we will get through this challenging period now, on higher prices. On the other side of this, I've said publicly that I think we'll be back to substantial disinflation. But most importantly, I think we've got the Warsh Fed now. And look, the economy, that it is challenging now, but unemployment is still low. Tax refunds were high. And consumer spending is still quite high. So in my private business over the years, I always looked at what were consumers doing, not what they were saying.
We've got the Warsh Fed now. Mark, Zandi is what he said. Do you believe the Warsh Fed will really treat this potential situation any differently than a Powell Fed would?
No. I mean, potentially Chair Warsh would vote for a cut in that kind of scenario where things are going south and the economy is going into recession. But I doubt the rest of the Federal Reserve, the other folks that are making the decision, would follow suit. Of course, former Chair Powell is on the committee. And if you listen to kind of the talk and speeches and comments being made by members of the Fed at the current time, they're not talking about rate cuts. More and more, they're talking about rate increases. And it goes back to inflation and inflation expectations. So I don't think it matters whether Kevin Warsh is chair or not. I don't think there's enough support to get enough votes to cut interest rates. And I'm not sure that would be the right policy either, right? Because if inflation and inflation expectations are high and rising, you need to get that back under control, regardless of what happens, to the rest of the economy. Because if you don't, again, you're going to have to raise rates even more down the road and result in an even deeper, longer recession with even higher unemployment. So, there's really no good choice here. So, no, I don't think that the fact that we now have a new chairman is going to make a difference in terms of how this Fed behaves going forward in that scenario.